What happens when you strip away disaster response, ignore life-saving warnings, and treat climate change like it's nothing more than a partisan game? Texas just found out. And the results weren't only devastating, they were deadly. This wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a warning shot fired straight at America's conscience. Because when politics takes priority over people, no one is safe. That's the chilling truth Texas Democrat Julie Johnson laid out on the House floor, in a speech that cut through spin, excuses, and partisanship like a knife. And what she revealed next, it should haunt every single one of us. Johnson began not with numbers, not with politics, but with grief. She rose to mourn the children of her state, young girls and boys who went to summer camp in Texas expecting memories of friendship, laughter, and innocence.
Justice Scalia wrote, and I quote, "It is well established that the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings," end of quote. You don't
I don't dispute that.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure, for the record, we understand that, because as you well know, the federal courts have found that there have been gross violations to date of many individuals' due process rights. Let me ask you a question about Judge Dugan, and I'm not going to get into about Judge Dugan, who was arrested, taken out in handcuffs from her courtroom. You agree that as director of the FBI, you should lead by example, right?
Try to.
Okay. Well, there's a confidentiality and media contacts policy within the Department of Justice guidelines that says specifically that DOJ personnel should not voluntarily disclose a photograph of a defendant unless it serves a law enforcement function or unless the photograph is already part of the public record in the case. Clearly, Judge Dugan's photograph was not already part of the public record in the case. So it appears that what you did was a violation of that policy, unless you can express a clear law enforcement purpose for having done that.
The simple law enforcement purpose is to show America that we investigate any individual who commits a crime, especially those in positions of public trust.
But do you agree with the presumption of innocence in the U.S. system?
Absolutely. As a public defender, that's what I fought for years.
Well,
but that's different than
no,
this.
But Mr. Director, this is one of the reasons why that guideline is there, so people, especially the director of the FBI, doesn't announce to the country that somebody's already been found criminally liable when they haven't. She hasn't, has she?
But that's not what we said, that she was criminally liable. We said she was arrested and showed it.
Yeah, we know she was arrested, but the issue is the photograph. I'm asking you, going forward, I hope as the leader of the FBI, you will comply with the guidelines of the FBI that everybody else is expected to follow.
I believe I have, and I will going forward.
Well, this seems like a direct violation of this guideline.
I guess we're in disagreement, Senator.
Well, unless you can tell me why that really serves a law enforcement function. So you're going to send out pictures of everybody that's arrested?
Lots of people that are arrested have pictures sent out.
I'm asking you as director of the FBI, is that going to be your policy, just to start sending?
No, we do it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Well, the guidelines make clear that I think any normal interpretation of this suggests it's a violation. Look, we're a budget committee, an appropriations committee.
Instead, they never came home. We lost the hope of our future, she declared, her voice heavy with pain. These weren't faceless statistics. They were sons and daughters, the kind of moments we all remember from our own childhoods, suddenly stolen away by waters that rose faster than anyone could believe. But Johnson wasn't there simply to mourn. She was there to demand accountability. And she wasted no time naming the culprit, not just the storm itself but the failures of leaders who turned warnings into politics and politics into tragedy. And as her speech unfolded, the full picture came into view. For years, scientists have warned that storms are becoming stronger, floods heavier, and freezes more deadly. Texas has lived through it all. Record cold snaps that killed hundreds, hurricanes that tore apart neighborhoods, and now a once-in-a-century rainstorm that brought catastrophic flooding. These weren't surprises. They were predictions, warnings written in data, and repeated by experts again and again. Yet when federal grants were offered to local communities in Texas to install sirens and early warning systems, many leaders refused to accept them. Not because the sirens weren't needed, not because the grants weren't real, but because the help came from a Democratic administration, and accepting it was deemed politically inconvenient. Communities that took the funding survived. Their people heard the sirens, moved to safety, and lived. But the community that rejected it, families drowned. Children never had a chance. Johnson's message was simple: pride killed where science could have saved. And as damning as that sounds, the failures ran even deeper. Johnson revealed that Texas's own governor had turned down 3 separate requests for emergency preparation funds. Each request was worth over $1 million. Each could have provided the tools needed to warn families, guide evacuations, and save lives. 3 chances, 3 denials. This wasn't about money. The funds existed. This wasn't about oversight. The requests were clear. This was about politics, raw, deliberate, and willful. Johnson didn't mince words. When help was offered and refused, the tragedy was no longer just a matter of nature. It became man-made. And as Texans waited for relief at the state level, another betrayal loomed at the national one. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, was created to be America's last line of defense in moments exactly like this. Its mission is straightforward: when the unthinkable strikes, FEMA steps in with training, manpower, and resources to support first responders. There's a reason FEMA is supposed to deploy within 15 hours, because in a disaster, every second matters. In a flood, 15 hours can mean the difference between families reaching safety or being trapped by rising waters. But when the rains came to Texas, FEMA didn't arrive in 15 hours, or 20, or even 30. Relief didn't arrive until more than 72 hours later. 3 full days. 3 days of children clinging to trees. 3 days of parents searching frantically for missing loved ones. 3 days of unanswered calls for help. The clock didn't just tick, it drowned. Johnson laid bare the reality. FEMA had been weakened, its resources cut, its staff gutted, its leadership turned into a political prize rather than a professional necessity. Hundreds of experienced workers were gone. Entire divisions had been hollowed out. And at the very moment Texans needed FEMA most, the agency was a shell of what it had once been. The failures weren't only about funding, they were about competence, or rather the lack of it. Johnson reminded her colleagues that Congress had once insisted FEMA must be led by someone with real crisis management experience. That requirement existed for a reason. Natural disasters aren't a game. They aren't a stage for loyalty tests or political rewards. Lives hang in the balance. Yet in this case, the director chosen to lead FEMA didn't even know whether hurricane season existed. That was the level of preparation at the top of America's most critical disaster response agency. When leaders don't understand the basics of the dangers they're tasked with fighting, what chance does the public have? But as disastrous as that revelation was, Johnson's speech had one more twist to deliver, one that left the chamber stunned. The day after the Texas flood began, as families dialed emergency numbers begging for help, something unthinkable happened. Contracts for phone responders, the very people meant to pick up when citizens dialed for rescue, were canceled. Not weeks before, not months earlier, the day after. Calls rang unanswered as flood waters rose. Parents screamed into phones that no longer connected. The human chain of survival snapped, not because of the storm, but because of a decision made in an office far from the flood zone. Johnson's words were sharp. This wasn't just failure. This was cruelty. To take away the final lifeline in the middle of a disaster wasn't incompetence. It was abandonment. And it turned tragedy into outrage. By the time Johnson concluded, her speech had become more than a eulogy. It was an indictment. This wasn't just a flood, she said. It was a political disaster, because storms don't care what party you belong to. Climate doesn't check voter registration before unleashing its fury. But when leaders choose ideology over preparation, when they prioritize loyalty over life, it isn't the politicians who pay the price. It's the families left behind in the water. Johnson called it what it was, a test of leadership. A test too many failed. And here's where her message cut the deepest. This tragedy wasn't only about Texas, it was about America. Weather is growing more violent, more unpredictable, and more deadly. The floods that swept Texas could sweep anywhere. The sirens that went silent in one state could fail in another. The children who never came home from camp in Dallas could just as easily be children in California, Florida, or New York. Climate doesn't discriminate, but policy does. And the choices being made, the grants denied, the warnings ignored, the expertise replaced with politics, those choices will decide who lives and who dies in the next storm. That's why Johnson didn't end with anger. She ended with a plea. I call on my colleagues, she said, to come together. Not because unity is easy, not because politics doesn't matter, but because storms don't stop at county lines. Floodwaters don't respect partisan borders, and when the next disaster comes, as it surely will, America cannot afford another 72 hours of silence. The question isn't whether storms will hit, the question is whether we will be ready, and the answer, Johnson warned, depends on us. Julie Johnson's speech wasn't just words on the record, it was a mirror held up to a government that has too often looked away. It was a reminder that leadership is measured not by speeches at press conferences, but by who answers the phone when families call for help. This wasn't about ideology, it was about survival, and the choice is painfully simple: either we prepare for the storms that are coming, or we allow politics to drown us again. So, if this moment shook you, if it made you angry, if it made you feel something, don't scroll past, don't forget by tomorrow what happened today. Because silence after a tragedy is exactly how it happens again.